That's still quite rare. And the one in 1918, it did cover coast to coast. However, other countries, it touched Japan and a few other countries as well on its way to the United States, starting from the West Coast. However, the one that occurred on the 21st hasn't happened since 1776, solely making landfall in the United States of America. That's pretty significant. And as all of you probably know, there was a significant event that took place in this country in 1776. And that was when this country was dedicated to Hashatan. So that's something to take a look at. And if you look at the path of totality, you'll see that it starts in Salem, Oregon, on the West Coast, and ends in Charleston, South Carolina, which lies on the 33-degree parallel. I don't know if there's any significance to that, but I thought it was worth pointing out. Excuse me. And I thought it was also very interesting that the path of totality covered the Cascadia fault line, which touches the San Andreas fault line on the West Coast. And it also went over Yellowstone, supervolcano Yellowstone, which is trembling and quaking. It also went across the New Madrid fault line, which runs in the smack dab center of the country. So it's just interesting looking at the path of totality and how it seemingly divides the country in half. All right, I wanted us to turn our attention to a connection between the eclipse that occurred on the 21st of August of 2017 and one particular eclipse that occurred on the continent of Africa. And that is a total solar eclipse that occurred here, as you can see on this map, in 1619 from the west, starting from the west coast of Africa, ending well off of the east coast of Africa to Madagascar. The African eclipse of 1619 began on the western coast of Africa in modern-day Gabon through Central Africa and exiting off of the eastern coast of Africa through the countries of Mozambique and Madagascar. As you can see from this green marker over here, the greatest eclipse occurred over modern country of Democratic Republic of Congo. And the greatest eclipse is virtually identical to the greatest magnitude of alignment and the greatest duration. In other words, this is the spot where the effects of the eclipse is greatest and longest and darkest. So what exactly was taking place in this region of Africa in 1619? Well, the Portuguese were making incursions into what was then known as the Kingdom of Congo and had captured their first batch of enslaved Africans sailbound towards North America. This wasn't without a fight, however. The formidable Queen Nzinga became famous and world-renowned as a warrior queen when she resisted the Portuguese insatiable appetite for African slaves. And as you can see, this is the lovely Queen Nzinga right here. And all of this was taking place in 1619 when the African eclipse occurred right over the Kingdom of Congo. This eclipse was a particularly long eclipse, topping out at 6 minutes and 41 seconds. Most eclipses fall between the 2-minute to 5-minute range. For instance, the Great American Eclipse of 2017 topped out at only 2 minutes and 40 seconds. And the region where this eclipse occurred took place in a kingdom where the Portuguese were enslaving Africans from the Kingdom of Congo, and they eventually were brought to Jamestown. We've all heard about Jamestown, Virginia, being the first city in America to have slaves. Well, this is exactly where they came from. 40 days after the African solar eclipse of 1619 arrived the first enslaved Africans onto the North American continent. Now, there were enslaved Africans who were brought into the Caribbean and brought into South America, but Jamestown, Virginia saw the first enslaved Africans on American soil, and Kingdom of Congo is exactly where they came from, where there was an eclipse that occurred just 40 days prior. So 40 days in scripture represents trials, tribulation, and testing. It's a very significant number. And remember, in 40 days, the city of Nineveh was supposed to be overthrown according to Jonah's proclamation in the book of Jonah, chapter 3, verse 4. So remember, 40 days is when Moses fasted on Mount Sinai. 40 days is when Yeshua HaMashiach was led into the wilderness to fast. So 40 days is a very, very significant number. And guys, this is not a coincidence. We shouldn't take it lightly. As believers in the word, we know that nothing is left to chance and circumstance. 40 days after the great African eclipse were the first enslaved Africans brought to the shores of North America in Jamestown, Virginia. Guys, this is very, very deep, okay? And this fulfills partially Deuteronomy 28. In Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, it says, "And Yahuah shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you." This is directly speaking to enslaved Africans, particularly those along West Africa, Central Africa, and along the Eastern African seaboard, actually by the Arab slave traders 500 years prior to all of this, around 1000 AD. But I'm not going to spend any time on the Arab slave trade just yet. That's an entirely separate presentation. I'm focusing solely on the information that is right in front of me, which is the African eclipse of 1619. And I'm sure if I dug deeper, oh my goodness, I would find so much more. If any of us dug any deeper, we would find so much more. There would be so much more revealed. But, we don't have all day. So I'm just going to try to keep it limited to the information that's been set forth. The name of the slave ship that was used to bring the enslaved people of Congo was named White Lion. And these were Hebrews that were brought from Central Africa, from the Kingdom of Congo. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, these were Hebrews in accordance to the scriptures, in accordance to the prophecies as outlined in the Bible, particularly in the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Leviticus. And throughout the Bible, these men and women from Africa were the enslaved Hebrews brought to the shores of America and throughout the Americas and quite frankly throughout the world. And I get it, guys. I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, my ancestors were enslaved too. The Irish were enslaved by the Barbary of North Africa, and the British were enslaved by the Moors, and the Native Americans were enslaved by the British. To an extent, that is very much true. But brethren, if we are going to be 100% completely honest, the Bible doesn't speak to this slave trade of the Irish, and it doesn't speak to the slave trade of the Europeans along the North African coast. It just doesn't. The Bible calls the slave trade of the Hebrews Jacob's trouble. It labels the affliction of Jacob and his seed, his direct lineage, his bloodline descendants, okay, the bloodline descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This affliction has a name. It's called Jacob's trouble. It's outlined throughout the Bible. The Hebrews were enslaved in the book of Genesis. They were in captivity in their own land in the book of Revelation, okay, throughout the Old Testament, even in the New Testament, and in all the other books and histories in between. The Hebrews were always in one form of bondage, servitude, slavery, or captivity. And ladies and gentlemen, that has not changed. Okay, that has not changed. I don't see the Irish slave trade in the Bible. Am I saying that it didn't happen? Absolutely not. I'm not saying it didn't happen. Of course it happened. I've researched all of this. Anybody can research the Irish slave trade and see that Europeans indeed were enslaved in Northern Africa. That's why Northern Africa looks the way it does now. That's why the people of Northern Africa are very, very, very much mixed, a very mixed looking people, because they have interbred and intermixed with Europeans for many, many, many generations, all right, through trade and through war and through the Moorish conquest, and then, of course, through the Barbary slave trade and through colonialization. With the British and the French very recently. So there's no denial that has been a slave trade of European peoples, okay, but that's not what's discussed in the Bible, okay? And that's what we're focusing on, the prophecies and the curses attributed to a particular group of people. The Bible doesn't speak on every people, not in that way, especially not as it relates to the curses. So I just want to make sure I made that crystal clear. These curses fit one particular group of people. The Bible says that this is going to be a sign as to who the true Israelites are, who the true descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are, who the true chosen of people of God are. It's all outlined in Deuteronomy 28 as well as Leviticus 26 and other scriptures. But read Deuteronomy 28 with open eyes and with open understanding, and you'll realize it's not talking about the Barbary slave trade. It's talking about the transatlantic slave trade, even the Arab slave trade. Okay? So I just wanted to make that clear. 7 years from now, in the year 2024, there will be a second total solar eclipse that's going to go across the United States of America. It's going to start here on the southern portion of Mexico and move across the entire United States and empty out of Canada. And as we mentioned in the previous slides and discussed the frequency of total solar eclipses and how at any given point anywhere in the world, total solar eclipses occur anywhere along the lines of once every 20 years, 25 years. Given this frequency of total solar eclipses, for another total solar eclipse to take place over the continental United States in 7 years, from 2017, and another one occurring in 2024, this makes this eclipse a highly unusual event. Total solar eclipses don't occur that frequently. And when they do, they certainly don't occur over the same landmass in 7 years. This is just a highly unusual event, even by NASA standards. What is interesting about this second solar eclipse is that when you look at the first one, which occurred in 2017, or the one that we're discussing right now, and the future one that's going to occur in 7 years, that's another highly prophetic number. I'm not going to go into it right now, but in 7 years, the second total solar eclipse is going to basically cross paths with the with the 2017 eclipse, making a big X in, I guess you would say, Middle America. It's going to make a big X over the state of Illinois, where the Mississippi and the Ohio rivers meet. Now, what's interesting about the Mississippi River is that it is the largest river system in this country and the fourth largest in the world after the Nile, the Amazon, and the Yangtze, respectively, with the Ohio River being one of its major tributaries. So that's where this X is right here. And it's basically going to make an X over southern Illinois in a town called Carbondale. Carbondale, Illinois is also known as Little Egypt. Okay. It's called Little Egypt for many reasons. First of all, because of the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers. And there is a university called Southern Illinois University, which has a mascot called the Saluki. Okay. And I would encourage you to go look up exactly what a Saluki is. A Saluki is an Egyptian bred dog. So that is another interesting point. And just south of Carbondale is another town called Cairo, Illinois. So this part of Illinois, for a variety of reasons, is very Egyptian influenced. Just go look up Carbondale, Illinois, and you'll see that these people, the founders, the settlers of that town, they were very much interested in calling it Little Egypt. Because of its resemblance, I suppose, to the Nile Delta region of Egypt. That's what they say. Another interesting thing to consider about the Mississippi River is that it's very similar to the Nile River in that it is a major commercial river system for this country. And geographically, it's similar to the Nile River in that it divides the country. 30% of the country is east of the Mississippi and 70% of the country is west of the Mississippi. Kind of similar to the Nile River and how it divides the country of Egypt, 70% of the country to the west and 30% to the east. What's interesting also is that the city of Memphis, Tennessee, lies on the Mississippi River. Remember, Memphis is not an English word. It is an Egyptian word. Notice I said Egyptian, not Arab word. two completely separate, different languages. And then you have sphinxes and obelisks everywhere all over this country. You have the Sphinx in Nevada. You have obelisks all over Washington, D.C. And it's just interesting because a slash is going to be made right over Egyptian influenced areas of this country. It is commonly taught and understood that America is not in the Bible. Others teach that America is in the Bible, but that America is Babylon. Well,